Welcome, Crater fans. This is a talk from Crater Remote Conf Mobile Edition. This talk focuses on building mobile apps using JavaScript. You can find out more information about upcoming Crater Remote Confs at conf.crater.io. Enjoy the talk. All right, welcome back to the fourth talk, our last talk of the conference. I just wanted to assemble a panel and start having a discussion. We're going to take some questions from the audience. I really just, I was inspired actually by Brian, who's part of the NativeScript team. He wrote an article talking about like when to choose certain platforms for building for mobile. And so that kind of inspired this panel. And so today we have Jen Looper with us from NativeScript, or Progress, I guess. Welcome, Jen.
Yes. Thank you.
And we also have Paul Dowman from OKGrow. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
You guys have done some Cordova stuff in the past, and now are you doing React Native stuff too, Paul?
Not yet. We haven't started any React Native project. Looking at it, would definitely like to use it for something, but as I'm sure we'll get into, it'll just depend on what's the right thing for each project.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess obviously like I haven't built any React Native apps. I've done some Cordova stuff, and so I think I certainly have opinions of it. But like, what are your thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of kind of Cordova right now, Paul?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the strength is that it lets you iterate really quickly. Weaknesses are that you're going to probably spend more time tweaking certain things if perfection in the UI is what you're looking for. And it's kind of, I think it just, that's why I started out. I think it's going to depend on what your goals are for the project. And yeah, so if you want, I think, and I'm going to say that for most projects for almost every project at the start of it, iterating quickly is very important. And I think it just depends whether you anticipate getting to a point where that is outweighed by other concerns, how soon you'll get there, and what you want to do when you get there, if you're going to eventually consider rewriting it with other tools or not. But and I would also say that for I don't know, I hesitate to put a number, but for a large amount of apps, you'll probably never get to the point where it's not good enough. For many you will, but anyway, I think they'll.
Yeah, you know, that brings up an interesting point too. Like I had a client, we built a Cordova app, and then they realized like there was a problem with the app being deployed. Like it didn't update over the air like it should have with Meteor and Cordova, and like they ended up realizing like, oh, we could just pull it up in the browser, it all works correctly. And then they realized like, oh, we just really needed a shortcut on the desktop. We're not sure we even needed a mobile app, so we're just going to rewrite all this as a web app at this point, which is kind of a funny choice to make, I guess, down the road. But wow. I don't know.
Well, you know what? I don't know that is. I think there are actually a lot of apps where that makes a lot of sense, and that's, I think, another strength of Cordova as well, is that I mean, and this also comes down to your opinions about perfection in UI, but there are a lot of cases where you would want to share the code. I mean, it also depends on your budget and how worth it is to like really duplicate work. But there are times that you might want to share things between the web and the app without having to maintain two versions. And again, it's not just about budget; it's about iterating quickly, and that at the stage of your project where iterating quickly is important, it's not even a budget thing at that point. It's just a make or break for your idea and your project, and getting product market fit at the right time in time.
Yeah,
potentially.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing I did like about Cordova is the fact that you could like utilize existing CSS frameworks. And is that So I'm gonna ask you, Jen, like, is that something you hear complaints about, or do people feel comfortable like using something like NativeScript? Well, actually, how does the design work with NativeScript? I know.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
the audio just cut out right there. Yeah. So with NativeScript, there's first of all, there's two ways to build a NativeScript app. One is what we call vanilla NativeScript, and that's just using JavaScript, CSS, and XML to build your front end. But we also have this up and coming integration with Angular 2. As we're waiting for Angular to get itself started, we're building, rapidly deploying on top of that. So that gives you the code story and also the design story. NativeScript offers an ever increasing list of CSS elements that we do support. And it's kind of actually a little miraculous what we can do with the CSS support. We now have keyframe animation that you can, that you can use within your NativeScript app, and that gives you, animation, native animation on device. So it's kind of a really exciting project to watch because it's kind of amazing what we're building. And in terms of the Cordova story, I think that what's really propped up Cordova is the existence of Ionic. It's so with a very short time and with very minimum effort, you can get a beautiful app up and running. I built a Christmas app in a week, which stores, it literally took more time for it to be approved in the Apple Store than for me to build the thing. So it's just it's a really exciting and nice way to go ahead and build that Cordova app. And that being said, the downside of Cordova would be, in our opinion, is the performance of it. When you have long lists of data that you need to be scrolling through and you need that native scroll, you're going to get that performance hit in a Cordova app. Whereas with React Native or NativeScript or any kind of native sort of hashing of data, you won't have the performance lag. So there's trade-offs, but like you said, there's for many people, a Cordova app is totally appropriate and totally acceptable.
Yeah.
So you got to pick what you want to use.
Yeah, I saw a really interesting article that was arguing for like why web apps don't actually make sense, and it actually talked about like all the different browsers and how CSS is not the same for every browser and how you're chasing down a lot of like visual bugs. So I mean that's kind of interesting to me to think about, like with iOS and Android. I guess we can like discount Windows phones, I don't know, but like you really just have kind of two UIs that you're targeting, and you really just have slightly different screen sizes you're targeting. So like maybe that's an advantage of building with a native bridge or building a native app. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm right in the middle, and my head is still in the middle of it. So excuse me for incoherence, but I'm working on creating this type of shared app right now. I'm using something that our community member Nathan Walker built. It's called Advanced Angular Seed, and it uses Angular 2. But you're building the UI and separating out your UI elements, your HTML elements, and it's deployed for a native app using NativeScript, and then Angular 2 for the web. So you have to be thinking about this UI sharing and how much you can actually share all the time. So it's just, and I'm not. I hope I'm doing it right, but it's you want to respect the constraints and the advantages of each of these platforms. I don't want to look at material design on my phablet. These sort of questions. You want something to look as native as possible for the platform that you're building on.
So I'm going to say that a lot of times it depends on what you're trying to do, and like I'm a fan of design as much as anybody, maybe less than some people, but I'm definitely a fan of design. But I live in two worlds. One is like the software craftsperson world that probably everybody here viewing this is. That's what you guys are, and that's where I come from as well. But I also spend a lot of time talking with our clients. So at OKGrow, we help clients build apps, and I'm keenly aware of their business needs, and I think it's something that we do that we really work hard to do is just try to not just be nerds about it and like sometimes what the craftsperson wants to do is not necessarily the right thing. and for the business sometimes. And so it sometimes makes sense to take make some sacrifices on what the UI might look like in order to be able to iterate quickly. And I'll argue that there's no way you can iterate quickly with anything else. I mean, as quickly as with Cordova, with anything else, because and keep in mind, I guess I'm thinking Cordova and Medium and Meteor, right? So you've got hot code push, you don't have App Store deploys, and I think that's probably the biggest factor. There's already a comment in the chat from somebody saying that he can build them apps quickly in React Native. Like, great, of course. Like, everybody feels they can build apps quickly, and it's all relative, right? But and somebody who knows React Native really well can probably, and doesn't know HTML and CSS and Cordova, you can build everything most quickly with the tools that you know. But so, like, I guess that's an argument for every cross-platform framework to be able to iterate quickly and not have to build two separate ones. But hot code push, really, like, I think don't underestimate that. Not having to go through the App Store approval process in order to make tweaks and changes, like, it's not just the time you waiting for the App Store approval. It's also not having to do the work of supporting backward compatibility in your API for the data. And I think that's actually the biggest thing. You could also choose to not bother with that with native apps, but I mean, realistically, you have a 2-week window where an incompatible change hasn't been updated by everybody, right? So with a Meteor or any other app that supports hot code push, and you don't have to go through the App Store, you can change the data format from the server radically and not care, and not have to work, and not have to do like, it can be a ton of work to support multiple data formats, and you're going to have to do that for at least a few weeks. So I think that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, hot code push is something that people ask for constantly. It's very, very important. Although, to be fair to the Apple Store, now the wait time is down to 2 days. So
that's
yay.
What they say, but that's what they say.
It happened to me. I can swear.
That's cool. I have a client that we did something kind of weird where we have a client that basically they white label the app and release hundreds of them. And so she releases new apps every week, and she figures that it's still on average like 2 weeks, but who knows? It's all anecdotal, I think.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, but what we've been looking at with HotPush is some interesting stuff that Firebase is doing, actually. So if you integrate your NativeScript app with Firebase, we have a lovely plugin ready for that. And they have this new thing in the Firebase console called Remote Config. And it's basically little key value pairs that you can create right in the Google Play Store. You can insert into your NativeScript app or any sort of app, and then you can push data from Firebase into your app, live. So I think a lot of services are trying to get at this and try to do it right. Yes, it's definitely easier for getting your nice APK slammed into the Google Play Store. No issue.
Yes, we're talking about iOS here. Yeah.
Yeah. Understood.
And I think you touched on this a little bit before, Paul, too. Like, I think the important thing here is to realize, like, you have to look at, like, if you're working with a client or you're managing a team, like, you really have to look at what the strengths are of that team. And maybe you have like a strong Java guy on the team and a strong Swift guy on the team, or so it might make more sense to actually build those natively and separately rather than try to go with React Native or NativeScript or something like that. Would you think, or no?
Maybe. I mean, you're still going to be, I think it just depends how, like, whether you really want to iterate quickly. Also, what's the culture in a company about how you design, like how things go through that stage of designing to building. And if it's very waterfall like, so if you if you spend a lot of time in like Sketch or Photoshop, and then make it really, really clear what you're going to build, and then it just goes off and gets implemented by two people, then maybe it doesn't matter. If you're more of the style where you just kind of iterate more quickly by the designer or the UI person doing design. And I mean, that's a lot less formal. And so I think it depends. So in that case, it would be hard for two people to do that simultaneously. They wouldn't necessarily agree on what they were doing.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't matter. I'm not sure, but
what we've found is we're dealing with a large pharmaceutical client. Can't mention the name, but they have, their standard enterprise team of, your iOS people and your Android people, and they have found themselves with 100 apps to maintain. So what with employee turnover and that portfolio, they're looking to find some cross-platform tool that would just standardize across the board to just simplify their lives. And it's quite interesting what they're dealing with. It's not something I would wish on anybody. It's rough.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, we were dealing with a similar problem when I worked at GoDaddy on the Outright project. I think it got renamed to GoDaddy Bookkeeping, but like we had the Backbone team and then like the Rails team, and then they had a Titanium app, which was pretty terrible. Like it wasn't super performant, and we were having trouble updating it, and like no one really wanted to work on it. And so they hired an iOS guy, and he decided to like redo everything as iOS native. And then they had to go find someone to build the React, and like it ended up being this terrible like juggling between the Backbone team, who had already built like this semi undocumented API and had things working the way they wanted, kind of like what Paul was talking about. And then like we had the iOS guy, and he's like, no, I need different data, and so like that became a problem as well. So.
Sounds like where you need a good architect to sort of like calm everybody down and just say, here's the deal.
Yeah, yeah, but that takes a lot of effort and time, and like getting all the players at the table and figuring all that out. And I think, maybe it would make a lot more sense to try to go cross-platform there. And that kind of segues into Alan's question here, which is like, if you're choosing a mobile development platform, do you factor in the web platform and maybe go with Cordova? Or like, I mean, there's not going to be a ton of, if you're looking at NativeScript or React Native, like there's not a ton of reuse because the components are different, right? Like the calls that we're making to say, like Spencer mentioned in the last talk, I'm going to call text rather than paragraph tag, Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what is happening with us is that we're seeing people who have a strong use case for web plus mobile to share a certain amount of code with the understanding that you're never going to get full code share because of the UI differences. I wonder if I should stop. So what we're seeing is that people are looking at Angular 2 as kind of the savior. I hope that's what it becomes. But we actually did a big showing at NGConf recently and demonstrated how you can share at least your service tier using the Angular 2 framework. And then, you're going to branch your UI a little bit according to your needs. But yeah, I mean, as much code sharing as you can get, it's a big win. Even
I totally agree.
For all different size shops. Yeah.
Yep. And I think like also with Cordova apps, you can build them in a style where you wouldn't really be able to share much UI code at all because you've gone with a framework that makes it very, I mean, like maybe you want Bootstrap on the desktop web version of it, and you want to have like Ionic, something very specific on the Cordova mobile part of it. And those things are hard to share, I think. Like I'm not really a designer, but I know we've tried to do that and it hasn't been perfect. So so I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that, but there are definitely places where it makes sense to share the same code. Also, another thing with, I guess I'm staking out a pro Cordova position here, so I'll just keep going.
Go for it.
I really am very open-minded, and it's not like at OK Grow we have a policy that we would only use Cordova. Like we use whatever makes sense. And we're interested in all kinds of things, but I guess I'm just sort of like describing the things where Cordova makes sense. And another nice thing about it is that you can choose whatever framework you like. So, if if you end up like, I mean, I guess in the days where you're using, I think the world is somewhat converging on two big UI frameworks right now, so maybe it's not that relevant. But given the rate of change, who knows where we'll be in a year or two as well, right? So you might end up wanting to switch between from React to Angular 2 or vice versa. Who knows, right? So, it's kind of nice to have that flexibility.
It's good to know as many frameworks as you can get your arms around, for sure. No question. It's like for us, we're just, we're going all in on Angular 2 because, the React Native folks have React. That seems totally logical to me. So we're just building as best we can to supply as much support as we can for the communities.
Yeah, I've got to imagine like Angular 2, like there's a lot of question there about what's the adoption rate going to look like and stuff. And like there's a lot of corporate or large company entities that have adopted Angular, and my guess is they're going to be looking at Angular 2 moving forward. So that's
the hope.
I think if you look at something like Google Trends or whatever, you'll notice that Angular is like an order of magnitude bigger. For what this is worth, I don't know if this is even representative of anything, and maybe there's less momentum. Who knows? But Angular is way more popular than React in the world right now so far. Not that matters.
It's kind of interesting. It seems like the bigger shops are kind of a little more geared towards the Angular. What's interesting to me is the difference between Angular 1 and Angular 2, and trying to understand that because it's not obvious. One of our team members, Todd Motto, there's an echo, published something called ng migrate, and it helps Angular 1 developers migrate, into Angular 2 as we understand it, as it is right now. What would really be great is to have Angular 2 released solidly, and we await that day with anticipation.
Nice.
There's something else that we haven't touched on, which is not, it's not Cordova, but it's still web, and so, there's also progressive web apps. And so, Josh, you mentioned like a few minutes ago that you had a client that ended up realizing that they actually all they needed was actually a web app that they could bookmark on the home screen.
That sounded really familiar.
Yeah.
PWA.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of apps where it actually, like for example, a lot of the traffic is driven by sharing of links, and like really a lot of times it makes sense to have a web app. And I think I'm not looking at progressive web apps as an app killer necessarily. I'm just responding to comments here, but I think it's interesting that like these things are kind of just becoming more integrated either way. So, and if you do have a web app, or something that it makes sense to receive traffic through sharing of links and whatever, at least that way you can actually support the sort of like add to the home screen and background or offline processing. Offline data, and that's all supported by service workers, which do background downloading of your static assets, things like that. So I think that's really definitely something to keep an eye on.
I think progressive web apps make a lot of sense for areas of the world that are heavy on the Android and light on the iOS. And I think that's why Flipkart went with it in India. It's a great technology for them, and it seems to be just working beautifully. It would be interesting. Someone says that I hear that they're super hard to build. I don't know about that. We did a proof of concept internally. But I think what people are looking to do also is to dodge the app download scenario, so that you could go somewhere and you wouldn't have to download their mobile app. People are addressing that in different ways, like with, bot integrations into Line or whatever, to avoid the app download. But this seems to be a trend that I'm seeing. It's kind of interesting to watch.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I use that I don't want to have. I don't want to bother to go do a separate search in the App Store or even be linked there and download the app and install it. Like if you've just clicked on a link for something and you are using a mobile web page, like a lot of times it's good enough. And I don't want that to be permanently on my phone.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is like what's iOS, like what's Apple going to do here, right? Because I feel like potentially the App Store is their cash cow, and potentially this could harm their cash cow, right? Like if you're not going through the App Store to download or do in-app purchases and that kind of thing, like I think they're going to be hesitant to embrace this at first. But as Apple Pay for Web's coming out and that kind of thing, like maybe we'll start to see something there. But yeah,
they don't support service workers properly right now, apparently. So
yeah, they're not loving it.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess those.
On the other hand, I don't know if like the US is basically the big iOS place. You know, I feel like. I mean, in China, definitely they're popular, but there's some really awesome Android phones out there, and certainly in India, China, South Korea, places like that. Like it's heavy on the Android.
Yeah, Android is actually huge in the world. Maybe not in San Francisco, but
we're just weird.
It's not an Apple.
Although I was at a conference and they asked for the people to raise their hands if they're wearing an Apple Watch, and I was the only person. So.
All right. So Dave asked, as a full stack developer, should I be building for scale from the onset, or should I plan to rebuild when it becomes a problem? Interesting. So I guess we're talking about the backend maybe here then.
But full stack, to me, that screams the need for progressive enhancement. I think that, you know, the idea that you'd start small and then you enhance to support all of the use cases that you need, that seems to be a better architecture in all cases than, you know, going back and rewriting. And I'm speaking as someone who was tasked with either building a mobile app or getting our sites responsive. And I went with the responsive, and oh, Lord, you know, it would have been really helpful to have done that from the get-go.
I think there can be a case for you know, not being afraid to eventually rebuild something down the road if it allows you to iterate quickly at the beginning. And I think this is like it's a really business specific thing. If you don't know that your business or your product is ever going to find product market fit or succeed, and the most important thing that you can do is just be able to change it as fast as you can, and like look at it as a prototype. Don't invest too much in it. That sometimes makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of times where you know what you're going to build is where you don't want to do that, and that's fine. But there's definitely times where that makes sense. And being
like
afraid
if you're in a startup and you need
it might stop
minimum product.
Yeah. And being afraid to rebuild, it might stop you from iterating really, really quickly at the start. Like,
yeah,
there is a case for prototypes. Anyone that's ever had to rebuild an app, a significant app, to do it like the big rewrite because the old code base sucked for whatever reason, you know, like that's actually a terrible situation too, right? And you realize that, you know, the new one is going to take longer and probably be buggier and worse for a long time than the original one.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just, you know, basically doing a prototype, getting product market fit, and, you know, maybe you get VC funding. Maybe you end up, you know, with money for whatever reason because you got the business right. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I would echo that, I guess, to some degree, right? Like even, you know, I'll bring up Pokemon Go because they definitely had some scaling issues recently. And like I don't know that like this is for a lot of people it's going to be a money problem. It's going to be very, very hard for you to get to the point where you actually have a technology constraint problem. And I know like Paul and I both worked on the Words with Friends app, and like they were getting to the point where they were hitting technology constraint problems. But we're talking like millions of people playing a video game, and that's something that I think even as a business that's very hard to achieve.
And they did not have budget constraint at the same time.
No, yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point, right? Like they could hire smart people to do the right thing.
Was it also like personnel constraints? Like they just didn't have the right team in the mix, or?
No, they were just, I think they were reaching the limits of what you could reasonably do to support that many people in MySQL. And so they started building in a lot of caching and that kind of thing. Because you had like this, oddly enough, like this onslaught of people that apparently really like to play Scrabble on their iPad after dinner. And so like 7:30-ish Eastern time, just huge influx of people. So.
Yeah, it raises this issue that I keep thinking about more and more, that like a good architect and good management can diffuse a certain amount of trouble. And I've been in shops where we had neither, and it's just a torment. And I just wonder if this is something that like we should be thinking about more carefully, like this, thinking more about architecture, not just slamming things around, breaking things, moving fast and breaking things. You know, it works for Facebook in theory, but no.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of being able to iterate quickly. So.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors before you see the rest of the talk. Raygun. Spend more time building great software and less time fighting it. Raygun helps keep a watchful eye on your web and mobile applications and tells you when problems arise. You can learn more at raygun.com. NativeScript, backed by Telerik by Progress, is an open source framework for building truly native mobile apps with TypeScript and Angular 2. Use your web skills to get native UI and performance on iOS and Android. Enjoy the rest of the talk.
But again, it's not for every stage of every project and doesn't work with every company for various other reasons. So,
yeah. So, and Dave just gave a little more insight in the comments there. He said he's thinking about making a multiplayer game and unsure what form it will take. And so I think, again, like maybe the game takes off. Maybe you use, like, for instance, we'll say Meteor. It's known how to scale it, right? Like you've got people who've come before you who are dealing with like 12,000, 15,000 concurrent connections at any given time. You can totally throw money at that problem and it's not going to be a big deal as long as you have the cash to do it. Like, Classcraft was spinning up 60, 70 servers to handle their load on the back end. And like for them, they had funding and that was no big deal. So things to think.
Is this game that he's making, is it going to be done in Meteor?
I don't know. I picked that.
Dave, put it in the notes. I'm curious. I'm always curious what people are using to build games.
Indeed.
I used to be ambassador for Corona SDK, so I have a weakness.
So, I'm kind of curious too. What are people generally using for a backend, or like what's maybe the consensus or the thoughts on backend for NativeScript?
Yeah, so of course Telerik has their own backend. We have our own backend. It's Telerik platform, and the database we use is based on Mongo, and we call it Everlive. That's a code name. But what we try to do is support as many integrations as we can. I'm really hepped up right now about Firebase. I am all in Firebase. It is amazing. I'm so happy the way it just makes my screens just perform beautifully. That the syncing of data is terrific. I love it. But we've also got people who are heavily invested in Microsoft shops. So they tend to look at Azure. A lot of Azure people. We also have plugins for like locally stored data, SQLite. Loki is another one. I think it's the same sort of thing. It's stored within the apps, and Couchbase as well. But I like to have something that I can, control externally. So for me, Firebase works beautifully. And of course, people have their own standard databases that they're making connections with.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on the back end as well, Paul. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be related to just Cordova, but like if you were going to start a new project for a client today, like what are some of the options you would be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would evaluate whether Cordova made sense or whether we were going to reach limitations in performance and UI that would be a problem. If not, it would be my first choice, just because, again, we can do hot code push. I would use Meteor for the back end still. I'd be looking at using GraphQL potentially with Apollo for certain things, but I think I'm still I'm a fan of going with the default Meteor as it is even right now. But again, it depends on every project. But I do like the HotPush. I gotta say that's my one of my biggest the biggest thing that would influence me at the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
That was always Meteor's big strength, right? The HotPush. Like you guys, Meteor was like the first to really make that awesome.
Yeah, and easy to do. Like you don't have to do anything. So.
Yeah, it's great.
Yep.
All right. No, we're kind of running to the end here. Like that was all I had. Do we have any more audience questions? I'm trying to look up. Guess what?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, can I just do a plug for a local event that we're hosting in Boston?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you go to developerday.nativescript.org, I'll put it in the notes. We're having a little one-day conference in Boston, so my home base, and we're going to be talking about everything NativeScript. So we'd love to have folks come. It should be a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome. I see it here. What's some of the cooler things that you've seen built with? I guess we'll start with you, Jen, with NativeScript, and then Paul, you can answer the same thing in regards to Cordova or React Native.
There's a developer. So we have some amazing community. We have like 1,900 people on Slack who are just like constantly helping and asking questions. And one of our most valued community members, Nathan Walker, who I talked about earlier, he has built an app. I'm trying to remember the name of it. He's working on it now. It's almost ready. It's Angular 2 and NativeScript, and it is allowing, shout out play. So you integrate, you grab apps, you grab tracks from Spotify, and then on top of it, you can record a little shout out. So you start playing the track, and then you record, hey, honey, this one's for you, and it saves, and then you can share it and have a little like dance party going on. So it's kind of like a lot of innovative stuff going on with audio, cool apps like that. But a lot of people working on line of business apps. I'm working on a couple projects. One is going to be done at Angular Connect, and it's also a Spotify audio thing. It's going to be, if I can make it work, it's going to be amazing. So crossing my fingers. A lot of good stuff coming.
Cool. Yeah, and as far as like cool things with Cordova, I mean, I think I've been pretty clear that Cordova's place in the world is not necessary for building the cool, flashy UI type apps. I mean, you can make like you can definitely make them look good, but if I was starting out to build like some flashy consumer oriented app, it probably wouldn't be it wouldn't necessarily be the first choice. But there are a lot of talented people with CSS, and some of them work at OKGrow, so I think you can do some good stuff. But yeah, if someone came to us with looking to build something really flashy, it would probably not be a Cordova thing.
I mean, like Untapped and Swerkit are all Ionic apps. So I was just like, yeah, like the comment says, it's not about flashy versus not flashy. It's about things that work beautifully. Those are some. There's another one on the Ionic showcase called, I think it's a chef. It's a recipe app. Looks really nice.
There was a fun app. I wish they would have released it as a Cordova app, though. Would have been interesting to see how it works. But it was called Moon, I think .co. It was quite a fun game. And it worked super well, even just in the mobile web browser. It was like all SVG based. That would have been a fun one to see in the App Store, though. I bet it would have done well.
Nice.
All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, I guess we can just wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks, Paul. And thanks for everyone who attended the conference. I've actually been recording the videos, so I'm going to try to splice them together and get a slightly higher quality version. The one that Crowdcast is putting out is only 640 by 480 and kind of a low bit rate, so it's kind of hard to read some of the text. So I'm going to try to rectify that and get something out, but hopefully you enjoyed the conference, and everyone, train going by, everyone that you saw talk here should be in the CreatorConf chat room, so feel free to ask any questions there if you had any other questions. And thanks for attending, and thanks for speaking, Jen and Paul.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting us. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for watching this CreatorConf talk from the Mobile Edition 2016. For more information about upcoming conferences such as the one in February 2017, go to conf.crator.io to learn more.